Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0 coming your way, episode 109 coming your way. Best ways to train muscles 2 times per week from Para Pharma. So in this one, we're going to talk about overtraining advice and thoughts. We're going to talk about training smaller muscles versus larger muscles. We're going to talk about light work versus heavy work. We're talking about PDs from Para Pharma for hardcore training. We're talking about Para Pharma brand quality. So this is going to be a great episode that you guys, whether you're new to weight training, whether you've been weight training for many, many years, there's going to be some good tips. Mobster and I, we have a combined, I'd say 80 years, 90 years
Yeah,
of training
close. 70,
experience.
80 years at least.
And we've trained with people who have a lot of experience, and we've done
Yes.
different techniques. We've trained at different gyms, gym environments. We've trained different styles. We've done all kinds of things. So what's amazing on this podcast is we're going to talk about the stuff that nobody else talks about out there. And this is this is kind of the boring stuff that a lot of people don't talk about out there. It doesn't get the clicks, doesn't get the views. But this is the bread and butter because you're going to use anabolic steroids. Great. You're going to use Para Pharma anabolic steroids, which are very high quality. But if you're not training
Yes.
properly
Yes.
and you're not
You get the
training,
best out of your training. Yes.
yeah, you're not going to get what you want out of your anabolic steroids in the first place. So we see a lot of guys use anabolic steroids and they look like shit because they don't know how to train. They don't know how to eat. So on this one, we're going to talk about specifically training, and then we're going to really teach you some new strategies that are going to
Yeah.
help you with your training. So let's start with the first topic, Mobster. Overtraining advice and thoughts.
Right. So for the average person that hits the gym, and this is without anabolics, Steve, I would suggest that training body parts, especially the bigger body parts, twice a week is foolhardy. We know that the average gym user uses the gym roughly 3 times a week. There's a semblance from the history of the sport and from most of our listeners' experience that at some point, you guys, myself included, Steve included, we've tried 5 days, 6 days a week. And I settled on roughly 4 days a week. I believe Steve is there or thereabouts. So roughly 4 days a week. Okay. And this is a combination of experience, knowing what we can handle, and so on and so forth. So the younger listener will occasionally, and I say this is probably the newbies that come into the sport, and again, this is without anabolics, get it into their head that if I train arms every day, my arms are enormous. And and you go, no, 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 no. Even if it's a small muscle group like biceps and triceps, if you train it every day, when's your arms going to recover? If you train it 5 days a week, you're only literally having 2 days a week and when you can recover. And I use this occasional analogy when I'll say, so they point out as an example, better than an analogy, say, show me a professional bodybuilder when we can go online now, Steve. I've been watching Derek Lunsford train for the last 5 or 6 weeks, pretty much, if not all of his videos, quite a few of his videos leading up to the Mr. Olympia, which I think is next weekend. Not this weekend, coming the weekend after, as you and I record this show. And he's not training muscle groups twice a week. So this man almost certainly is on the same amount of anabolics as all the other top professional bodybuilders. He has arguably one of the best physiques in the world, having won 2 different classes, the 212 and Open Mr. Olympia. First time ever that's ever happened. We've had really good bodybuilders that have switched over, and we've had people that have competed in the 212 class, but this is the first time he was being a Mr. Olympia in the 212 and then the Open. He's an absolute fucking freak, Steve, at the height that he's at. And he's not training the same muscle groups twice a week. Now, we have seen this in the past. Ronnie Coleman was a good example, and I'm going to tell you the approach that's worked. This applies to strength training as much as it does bodybuilding. The reality is that for the majority of users, if you train a muscle group, biceps and triceps is a good example again, sufficiently hard to stimulate growth, and you are training, one would hope, the other body parts as well, you're not just training arms, I would argue, Steve, that for the majority of listeners, probably 80, 90%, maybe even 95%, as high as that, should not train that hard again in a 7-day period. There are ways around this in terms of not doing the 7-day week, but a 10-day training period, light sessions and heavy sessions, which we're going to get into. But for the majority of people, and especially the larger muscle groups, Steve, the impact on your central nervous system, the ability to recover, um, the sheer experience of making that muscle sore twice in the same week and expecting great results, even with anabolics, makes for most people overtraining. What do you think on that before we get into anything else?
Yeah, and I'll take it from another angle. What about your soft tissues? What about little micro tears in your soft tissues that develop things like tendonitis and arthritis and stuff like that? If you keep overtraining and don't give your body a chance to keep up, you'll end up with tennis elbow, for example. How many times has that happened? That's happened to me. Back in my mid 20s, I can remember I ended up with forearm splints, it's called.
Yeah.
I ended up with wrist inflammation, elbow
Steve,
inflammation.
people have got sore shoulders right now. And the idea of training your shoulders, how many people on the forum, and myself included, because I've had the same issue, have had sore or injured shoulder joints, and that's from training once a week. So the idea that you could have a injury, say for example, around a ball and socket of the shoulder, and train shoulder workout, back workout, bicep workout, tricep workout, all around that upper body, all around that joint, and then do those routines or body parts or exercises twice a week. When we've got people injured, myself included, yourself included, at some point in your training career, twice a week makes no sense whatsoever. And that again is both with and without anabolics. So Steve is quite right when he talks about the soft tissue damage. We're training the muscle. That's the reason why we're in the gym. We're not trying to fuck ourselves up. Not really, not unless we're absolutely crazy. Most of us don't want to get injured. And the idea that your soft tissue, your connective tissue, that's the tendons, that's the membrane around your muscle, the fascia, that's the bone itself, inflammation around the joints, and so on and so forth, being impacted, as Steve quite correctly says, once a week and still being an issue for a great majority of users, people that actually should rest their shoulder joints, wait till they're recovered. They're not doing any kind of rehab. They're only training shoulders once a week. They're only training back once a week. And they're staying injured. There's pain and discomfort in the joint, whether it's the knee, the hip, the elbow, or the shoulder, as Steve said with the elbow. And then try to do that again in the same 7-day period? No, makes no sense whatsoever, Steve. So carry on with that particular point of view as well.
Yeah, and the muscle is very durable. Our muscles can take a pounding, but your ligaments, your tendons cannot. This is why you see so many professional athletes who play at a very high level, whether it be bodybuilders, football players, basketball players, and then they end up with ligament or tendon injuries, major injuries. And even with the most expensive doctors and the most expensive surgeries and the most expensive rehab and the best medical care, they are forced into retirement. So imagine you as a bodybuilder. Mobster and I, we've been training since we were teenagers. Imagine us year after year pounding away at our ligaments and tendons. What happens is when you're young, you get away with it in a lot of cases. Like when I had my injuries, my wrists, my forearms, my elbows, I was overtraining. I was doing more arm workouts than I should. And I was able to kind of push through it, right? But eventually, what happens when you get in your 30s, your 40s, and especially in your mid 40s and then going into your 50s, is those injuries don't recover anymore. So you can't train through them. So what's going to end up happening is something that really, really sucks. And this is worse, the worst thing that can happen, Monster. And that's that you have to take a long time away from the gym. You go to
Yes.
your orthopedic doctor, not some regular idiot GP doctor. I'm talking about a real good orthopedic doctor that you go to. They look at you in the eye, and this happened to me, by the way. They look at you in the eye and they say, you know what, Steve? You will never be able to lift heavy again. Your shoulder is torn to the point where you will never lift heavy again. The only option for you is you could have an expensive and risky surgery on that shoulder, then
Yeah.
go through a 6-month rehab, and
Yeah.
maybe in 2 or 3 years from now, you'll start moderate weight, and maybe in 4 or 5 years, you'll be able to lift heavy again. Maybe. That's a very big maybe, and that's going to cost you
Thousands, tens of
$250,000
thousands.
between the
Yeah.
surgery and the
Yeah.
therapy and all
Yeah.
this stuff. Or your other option is you need to stop overtraining and stop pushing this heavy weight. So you don't want to
Yeah.
get to that point. So you want to take care of your body because we're not robots, and it doesn't get easier as you get older. And when you use anabolic steroids, A lot of times, yes, they do help recover when we're talking about anabolic steroids, but they also will push you to greater heights. And that's what happened to me because I used Tren and it pushed me to bench 420 pounds, which for
Mm.
someone who's only 5'5", 5'6", and 195, 198 pounds, to be pushing
Right? Yep.
more than twice your weight is an insane amount of weight. And what happens is your soft tissues can't handle it. So that's what happened to me is my shoulder, of course, it was my right shoulder because when I was doing this heavy weight, I was pushing more on my right side because I'm right-handed. And what ends up happening is that's why I talk to my clients a lot who have similar problems. I say, "Are you right-handed or left-handed?" They're like, "Oh, I'm right-handed." I'm like, "Okay, it's probably your right shoulder that's going to go first, and then your left shoulder will go after because you're going to overcompensate on the other side." It's just
Mm.
like you know, these. That's what happens, right? So we're not robots made of steel and iron. We're humans. We have flesh. We're very sensitive. Okay, you get in a fight with a house cat and that house cat will fucking take their nails and they will scratch the shit out of you and just kill you. Okay. Because you're just flesh. We're weak. We're fragile. So you got to take care of your body. So overtraining doesn't just mean, well, I'm going to, I need to give my muscles a rest. It also means you're going to cause problems. You're going to cause these little nagging injuries and they become chronic. And once they become chronic, that's when it's going to get miserable because now you have to train around that injury. So it's better just from the start to just learn to do it the right. It's like getting a stick shift and you're not using that stick shift correctly because you were never taught the fundamentals of driving a stick shift. And then what ends up happening after like 5,000 or 10,000 miles, you're driving one day and then you get white smoke coming out of your engine because you destroyed that stick shift because you never learned how to use that stick shift properly. And then you
Steve, do you
tore
know
it
what?
up.
There's almost an argument to be made when it comes to overtraining. I would actually almost argue that someone who's new to training isn't sufficiently strong to fuck themselves up. There's almost an argument to be made that once you become more muscular, once you become stronger and more muscular, and that applies to bodybuilder, not just strength athletes. Bigger muscles typically a stronger muscle. You can handle more volume. You can pick up heavier weights. It takes more to stimulate new growth. There's almost an argument to be made that the newbie gets away with more than the more experienced athlete. And normally it would be the other way around. The person that's doing this, because you're, for example, you've been training 5 or 10 years and you go back to your training diary, you look at what you used to do, especially social media now, the youngsters again. You go back and look. And maybe when you started training, you were doing biceps and you was only curling the 5 pound dumbbell. You was a bit embarrassed because you'd seen the pros and what they were doing, the weights they were posing with. 5 pound dumbbell, 5 sets of 10 to 12 repetitions when you first started, and your arms were sore all the fucking time. Years later, you're doing the 40s and the 50s. I would actually argue that the person curling the 5 pound dumbbells could probably get away with, in terms of not injuring themselves, more volume, more frequency, twice a week training those arms with the 5 pound dumbbells, whereas the person that's now able to curl the 50 pound dumbbells cannot, because it's a much greater risk factor involved in terms of injury and recover and the soft tissue damage. You've become strong enough that you need bigger weights, 50 pound dumbbells, to stimulate growth. 50 pound dumbbells to give you a great pump, but you used to get a hell of a pump with those 5 pound dumbbells when you first started. But you wasn't fucking your bones, you wasn't fucking your connective tissue. I know some enormously strong athletes. I'm thinking of Terry Hollins, Brian Shaw, Lawrence Shirley, and others, who've all at some point torn a bicep doing the stones that they do in strongman, the Atlas stones that you see them doing in the world's strongest man, because their arms are extended, they're picking up heavy and heavy stones every year, and they've all had to go back to just curling the bar for 100 reps. Whereas the weights they use on the deadlifts, the weights they use on the Atlas stones, some of those Atlas stones are over 200 kilos, 440 pounds. I think they've been doing stuff at the Arnold and Brian Shaw's own Shaw Strength Classic, 250 kilo stones. That's 550 pounds. And the arms are out and extended with the bicep under tension with 550 pounds, Steve. It's just crazy. How many of the smaller guys, the 90 kilo guys, 200-pound body weight guys that are picking up 90 kilo stones are getting bicep tears? Very few. So it's arguable in a perverse way that you can get away with less impact on your central nervous system and less impact on your soft tissue when you lifted less weight, but were just as crazy sore when your gains were absolutely fantastic. So again, with the anabolics, as Steve said, and we will get into it, do anabolics help you do more work? Absolutely. Can they help you train certain muscle groups twice a week? Absolutely. Will you get bigger and stronger using anabolics without? Absolutely, you will. No doubt about it. But you still need to have some of the protocols that we're going to suggest to enable you to do certain particular things to the level, to the volume, doing the 2 times a week. Let me deal with one right away, Steve. I'll do the smaller muscles versus the bigger muscles, okay? Which is a topic for part 2, so to speak. So you can train, as I've just said, smaller muscle groups, specifically, for example, Steve, forearms, biceps, your lateral posterior and anterior delts specifically, but again, watch for that joint around the shoulder that we talked about multiple times. You're more likely to be able to train the calves, and to a lesser degree, say, for example, the little detail muscles up in the armpit, the teres muscle. Sometimes you can get away just about, because it's a relatively small muscle group, again, your calves. And another one, which is actually really good for frequency, Steve, would be your abs, twice a week. And again, I will talk about specific protocols as well. The bigger muscles, and specifically back, to a lesser degree chest, but again, your quads. These muscles, I would argue, Steve, that if you train heavy enough with sufficient volume to stimulate growth, the impact on your central nervous system, your ability to recover from a workout, and length of time, just how fucking goddamn sore they can be if you've had one of those hella kind of workouts. As a great example, if Steve and I were to be in the same room and decide to train quads together, and we want to fucking push the envelope, and we did, for example, myself, a higher volume than I'm normally used to by training with Steve, or low volume, Steve training with me with the heavier weights, I would argue that both of us doing one or the other, which is different from what we would normally do, we probably have sore legs for 3 to 4 days. That's half a week right there, Steve. The idea that we could then train it 3 or 4 days later when we've barely got over the soreness and do it again in a 7-day period makes no sense. It's a lot easier for the smaller muscle groups to accommodate this. So you need to have that kind of stuff in mind. Protocols, for example.
Let me ask you this. So people listening to this, I think, we don't want to go too much on one side, because people listening to this be like, I can just go.
What about, flip it around. I'm going to give them some ideas, but carry on.
But no, but what I'm asking you is this. You're saying train once a week, but train the shit out of that muscle. Yes. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, because protocol suggestions, and I'm going to give it, Ronnie Coleman was a great example of this, Steve, but I will do with other suggestions as to how these things can be done. So on some of the Ronnie Coleman DVDs, most of which now are available on YouTube, if you look, I believe 2 of the videos, 2 of the tapes, DVDs, whatever else, have him training his chest and his back twice in the same week, twice in the same 7-day period. You have to remember, of course, at this point, he was a professional. A lot of his time, as we discussed on other shows that you and I have recorded, would have been set aside for massage and deep tissue massage and recovery. But he did not do the same chest workout in the same week or the same back workout in the same week. He would do bench press, for example, in one session with a barbell, and bench press with dumbbells in another session. He would do cable rows or pullovers or something similar for back workout 1, but back workout 2 was heavy barbell rows, and so on and so forth. Deadlifts might be included in that particular workout. So arguably, and this applies, if you take the lesson from that and you put it to the average Joe again, you would have a heavy compound specific or targeted back workout, for example, so deadlifts, heavy rows, chins, and so on and so forth. And then a much more detail orientated, lighter, perhaps higher volume, but less impactful on the central nervous system, back workout number 2. As an example, and again, we can go online and we can look at top professional bodybuilders and how they train. As an example for legs, very few top professional bodybuilders or indeed strength athletes or even athletes of any kind train the whole of the knee to the hip area. That means all of the quad muscles and the hamstrings and where the hips are tied in, etc., etc. They're not doing that workout all in one session. They're not hitting every single part of that. You see a lot more inner and outer thigh work now, where people are filling in gaps in their physiques. You see much more quad dominant and hamstring or glute dominant type workouts, and so on and so forth. So again, they are splitting that body part into two. Previously, and this would be normal, Steve, would be a back workout, a shoulder workout, arms workout, legs workout, and then you might do something else like abs and calves. What you're now starting to see is where muscle groups are getting split up. You could, as I said, so you've got the two options. One is the same muscle groups, but a lighter, higher volume, more detailed approach, and then a second workout or even the first workout, whatever way you want it run, guys, which is more compound, heavier, much more mass orientated workout versus the lighter compound, or literally splitting, for example, Steve, upper and lower back, quad and glute, bicep and tricep, pressing type workouts, pulling type workouts, and so on and so forth. And that is a way that people get around these things. Something else I want to touch on as well. And these DVDs and videos that we look at don't always make this clear. Sometimes they're great to watch and they can be kind of inspiring. But one of the things I've talked about for years is that we are all hung up, and I'm including myself here again because that's the way that I train right now, on the idea of doing my 4 workouts in a 7-day week period. Why? Why? I'm not training for a competition. I'm not training for a strength competition or a bodybuilding competition. If I was a footballer, I have to train for the matches when they take place. If I play American football, I have to train for when those games take place. But some sports, and especially, again, the vast majority of our listeners will be recreational lifters who lift because they want to, because they want a great shape and so on and so forth. You do not need to train in a 7-day work frame. You can train in a 10-day or a 14-day work frame, which means, for example, Steve, you could have an A workout, heavy compounds, and a B workout, isolated, more targeted type workout, and have that over a 9-day or a 10-day or an 11-day period. You don't have to do, for example, and let me use another example I've seen, and this is very common, and again, I've been guilty of this in the past. I'm sure you have as well, right? So we start off with a very basic, structured routine that perhaps we read in a magazine or in a book or we saw online, or even someone put this together for us, perhaps a PT or a coach or a buddy. They put together the workout for us. And over time, without meaning to, without realizing what we're doing, we've added to the workout. Oh, I saw someone doing straight arm pull downs. That's great for that little tine in the armpit. I'll include that in my back workout. Oh, there's a thing there if you can do dips, but why don't I do tricep kickbacks? People will do this thing where the workout ends up being 8 exercises just for a single body part, and they're still keeping the volume the same. At some point, the intensity starts to drop off. But they're doing 8 exercises, 3 to 4 sets per exercise. The workout's gone from 1 hour to 2 hours. And again, I said, why don't you split that in half? Why don't you do 4 exercises to give you all the detail that you want in a particular muscle in workout A, and workout B can be the other 4. It doesn't all need to be done at once. So there's definitely an argument in there, Steve, in terms of not doing a 7-day work period, but training. Again, if you have a specific sport, let's say a thing at work, every so often back in the day when I worked at the factory job, Steve, we had a badminton tournament, but it was once a year. So I could prepare probably for 3 or 4 months in terms of playing a game against one of the directors or manager at work or something like this. And I was already weight training. I was already running to work. It would have made sense for me to spend maybe 1 day a week for the 3 to 4 months, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, getting ready for this badminton tournament. I never did it. It was shit. But I should have done it, preparing as part of my overall training thing for this once a year badminton tournament. Most of us don't do that. We train because we want to, but we get stuck on the 52-week thing. We get stuck on the 7-day week. We don't have to. There are no particular competitions. Perhaps you're getting in shape for your holiday. Most people have a good holiday once a year. So you should start thinking about training certain muscle groups a certain particular way in advance. You can't compensate, I think, for the majority of listeners, even with anabolics, by upping the sheer amount of volume and all the times that you train in the same time period that you've kind of trained for the rest of the year and expect to get greater results at the end by doing more work. Now, there's a great argument in terms of the science, which is to do with work, time, under load, etc., etc. But that's okay in terms of measuring what you're doing. What you need to do, and what we should all be focusing on, is the results. If we train too much or we train too often, and the results aren't there, then the training needs to change. There will be, as I said, 5%. When I said 95% can't do that, 5% can. Some people are able to do that. Steve, talk about the volume and frequency that you trained when you was doing triathlons, just as an example of the impact on your body if you did too much and too little.
Yeah, and that was the tough part, because if you train too hard, you did too much high intensity training, then you literally wear yourself out ahead of the competition, and you go into the competition sore, you go into the competition with some joints issues, and knees and ankles and feet felt a little weird. But if you didn't train enough, you go into it, and you're during the race, you're got your, I'm looking at my GPS watch, and I'm not pacing the kind of pace that I was hoping for, because I'm not I don't have enough wind. I'm getting tired. My heart rate is getting too elevated, where it's hitting too close to my max. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I wish I had done more training. I wish I had done maybe more long. So one of the things I would do is I do more long distance training, light long distance training, to really work on my endurance, versus more high intensity training that really, kind of wore my body down. I didn't react too well to high intensity training, especially if I was running on like a track or a treadmill or something, because that really does more damage to your legs. So what I would like to do is I'd like to run barefoot, like around a soccer field on soft surface. So when you're weight training, you have to kind of have that same mentality where, yes, I need to train hard. I need to build up my conditioning, but I can't overdo it, because if I overdo it, now I'm setting myself back. If you're a power lifter, you go in your competition powerlifting, like the day after your powerlifting competition, you're weak as fuck because you just shot your wad. Okay. You're going for your max as you shot your wad. So you want to make sure you don't shoot your wad leading up to a powerlifting competition either. So you want to make sure that you're building up your conditioning and building up your strength, but not overtraining, because you go in your competition and you're going to be weak, you know? So I want to touch on training smaller muscles versus larger muscles as well, Mobster. So one of the things that I learned a long time ago is certain muscle groups need to be approached differently. So I'll give you an example. You can train your abs and your calves daily, okay?
Yeah,
But it's not necessary to train them heavy. And the reason is your calves, you train your calves literally walking up and down stairs. You're training your calves.
yes,
Going for a walk, you train your calves. Even driving, you train
yeah,
your
yeah.
calves.
Even
So
driving, yeah,
your calves do a lot of training. So it's not necessary. With your abs, it's the same thing. When you sit down, when you lay in bed, when you get up from out of your bed, you're literally using your abs, right? You're using a lot of muscles, but you're using your abs. But so abs is one of those things that some people that I know train. I wish I had the discipline to do this, but some people literally, Mobster, first thing in the morning, they wake up, they drink some water, they go to the bathroom, take a shower, and then, or before they take a shower, they literally do 50 or 100 sit-ups. That's
yeah,
literally their daily routine. So they hit their abs every fucking morning, and that helps them build these rock hard abs that you see. You see these rock guys with rock hard abs that in magazines or on TV or something. They're working their abs pretty much every day, and
yeah,
you can do that because your abs are a muscle you could train every day. Now, when it comes to things like bench press, if you go in every day and you do bench press and you go heavy on bench press, what's going to happen? You're going to open yourself up to shoulder problems. Your shoulders
yeah,
are going to
yes,
take a beating. Squats. We see this trend a lot on social media, okay? This is one of the reasons I don't like going on social media, because there's so many fucking stupid people. And one of the stupid things that I've seen is doing squats every fucking day. You know what's going to happen if you do squats every day? You know what's going to happen to your hips once you get
yeah,
mobster's age? You're not going to have any
yeah,
cartilage in your hips. You're not going to have any cartilage in your knees. All right. You're going to absolutely destroy the cartilage. The soft tissue is going to take a beating. Don't this it's But it's unnecessary. I don't care if you're power training, powerlifting. I don't care if you're bodybuilding, I don't care whatever you're doing. It's not necessary to do squats every day. It doesn't help you, it hurts you. So you've got to be smart when it comes to which exercises you can hit and which. So if you want to train every day, why don't you training your heart is another muscle. Heart's a muscle. I'm going to include this. Training your heart every day is a good idea. Doing some sort of activity is smart. I don't care if it's playing volleyball. I don't care if it's playing basketball. I don't care if it's walking the dog. I don't care if it's doing, some laps around the soccer field. It doesn't matter. Going to Pilates, going to yoga. These are all great ways to do cardio. So stretching, doing cardio, that's not that's not invasive cardio. So don't run on the sidewalk every day, because sidewalk is hard as a rock and you're going to ruin your joints. If you want to go running every day, I would go barefoot and I would find a soccer field and run on a soft surface. That will save your legs. And then abs. If you want to wake up every day and you want to do 50 sit-ups, that's great to build a strong core and strong abs. There's actually women, when I go do yoga, there's women, Mobster, that do Pilates every fucking day. They do Pilates, an hour of Pilates, and they are strong as their core is strong as fuck. Their core is stronger than these professional bodybuilders that you see out there. A lot of them, not all, but a lot of them. And definitely their core is stronger than 90% of the gym people that go to the gym, because you build a weak core when you don't train your core and you train other parts of your body like a lot of people do. So training your core is a good thing to do. You could do that every day. So if you're a person, you're like, Steve, I got to do something every day. I got to do something every day. There are options for you to do something every day, but don't do the big compound lifts every day.
No.
That's stupid. I actually realized that when I was a teenager, Mobster. I go into the gym and I do clean and jerks, and I do bench press, and I do these just because I enjoy doing them. But I realized after a while, you know what? I'm actually getting weaker by doing this. I'm getting weaker. What's going on here? Then I realized
most of us, Steve, aren't analytical enough. And one of the things I've talked about from my own competitive career, such as it was within the niche sport that I enjoyed, the grip training, is that I would literally start. I was lucky enough, intelligent enough at that time to be analytical about my training. So, for example, I had times when I could train every single day, meaning I wasn't working or had sufficient funds that I didn't have to work or whatever. And for various short periods of time, weeks, months, I was able to do certain particular things. But again, the reality was that if I trained, for example, too close to a competition, right after a competition, that was crazy. Trying to train at the same level of intensity or with the same load after finishing a competition, having peaked for that competition, that never worked, and so on and so forth. So, for example, let me give you an example of the ways that you guys might be able to moderate these things. You cycle the levels of intensity. A low intensity, meaning you're not killing yourself every workout, will probably allow you to train certain muscle groups twice a week. A high level intensity will not. So the closer I got to the competition, the more I had to focus on rest and rehab. I absolutely had to do those things. I've talked about deliberately overtraining and allowing for super compensation, but I would only do that for 6 out of a 10-day period. In the 10 days leading up to competition, deliberately have 2 workouts. And even then, Steve, the volume was actually kind of low, but I was having an A workout in the morning and a B workout in the afternoon. I was taking the same workout that I've been able to do in one session and splitting it into 2. But again, I was a much higher percentage of my 1 rep max, which is what I was pretty much trying to do for the competitions because it was strength orientated. So that's one. Another one, as an example, comes from powerlifting, Steve. And again, it's like I said about Ronnie Coleman's A and B workouts for back and A and B workouts for chest. In powerlifting, and this will reflect a few of the listeners, you have I've forgotten the name that comes from West Side, but essentially for bench press, for example, you have a speed orientated workout where you are trying to move the bar as fast as possible, and then you have a power orientated workout. So, for example, I've trained chest, barbell bench press specifically, where I would do a lower percentage, my 1 rep max, but do more sets and reps, and then a much higher second workout 4 days later. So 3 to 4, let's say Monday and then Thursday, so 3 days later, would be the much higher percentage of 1 rep max. If I'd have done a much higher percentage of 1 rep max in both workouts, I wouldn't have been able to do it. The lighter weight, trying to move it quickly, developing that power, getting the ball off my chest quicker, was with 80%. And then as I clock close to the competition, you're looking at roughly 90 to 95% of my 1 rep max for the second workout with a much less volume approach again. So those kind of things, you have to cycle levels of intensity, meaning that, for example, even in the 2 workouts I've just discussed for power, the beginning of a 16 or 20 week training cycle would be a lower percentage. The numbers I gave, the percentages I gave, are at the end of that 16 or 20 week training cycle. So, for example, the 80% workout would have been 60% at the beginning of the training cycle and built up to 80% of my 1 rep max for the higher volume, faster bar movement, etc. And the power one, which was 90 or 95%, would have been closer to 70% or perhaps 80% of my 1 rep max moved for sheer power, multiple singles, doubles and triples, but a much higher percentage. And again, lower percentage of 1 rep max at the beginning, higher percentage of 1 rep max at the end. Basically, and we've talked about this before, if we know, and we can go online and look this up, the listeners can do the same, the best athletes in the world have given us specific insights. Doesn't matter what sport you're looking at now, Steve, but let's say it's a person that does literally athletics, a person that does American football, a person that plays soccer, or a bodybuilder or a weightlifter, and we can see that there will be skill-based workouts. We can see that there'll be workouts where they work on weaknesses, and we can see that there are workouts where they just put in the fucking work. We also know, for example, and I think in American football, again, Steve, you know more about this than I do, the beginning of the season, if the guys haven't prepped in the time between the end of the last season and the beginning of the new season, those first few weeks when they come back to training camp are horrendous. And it's incredibly difficult to recover from. And the likelihood of an injury at that time is incredibly high. If, however, they had a short break, say a couple of weeks, and then did some work, just working on rehab and a much lower percentage. And then when they come back to training camp, they can handle the work that the coach and the trainers have got them doing much, much easier. And we need to have that. And these are the highest level athletes, strength athletes, bodybuilders, American football players in the fucking world. And if that's the case with anabolics, with peptides, with growth, with insulin, with whatever, that these people are using to stay in shape that they can afford to pay for, then the average Joe needs to look at what they're doing. And you've got to say to yourself, again, if you're not progressive, that means you're more muscle, leaner, or stronger, then the approach you're taking might not be the right one for you. So you need to be very, very careful. As I say, there are ways around this, and I've touched upon these already. So that's changing from a 7-day week to a 10 or a 14-day week training cycle, allowing more time to prep, certainly cycling the levels of intensity. Let me deal specifically with those of you, and again, it's roughly that 5% I mentioned at the beginning, that are bodybuilding and want to compete. We have on the forums right now, Stephen, a lot of our listeners will come from the forums, at least half a dozen or more individuals that are competing to the highest level. Canadian fella just got second in his class, looked amazing this weekend, just gone. We've got a 55 plus competitor that competes on a regular basis. We've got other athletes that have competed or are competing for specific challenges and so on and so forth. And we see these transformations. So what makes sense to me in their example would be that they do the work, meaning the compounds, the workouts that keep the muscle on the bone. Big cap delts, big full chest, broad back, thick thighs, good calves, nice forearms, etc. These meat and potato type workouts, what we call compound workouts, the ones that built the muscle that got them to the size and shape before they competed. Then what should happen, and this is where some of these techniques can be used, is you start to look for the gaps in your physique. It might be the pec delt tying. It might be that you broad-shouldered, small-waisted, thick-thighed, etc. But you competed and you went and saw a judge, and the judge said if your arms were a little bit fuller looking from the front, I'd have probably give you another couple of points, and that might have put you on the podium. That might have given you a second place. That might have given you a first place. As an example, we've got an Australian competitor, and I asked him recently, Steve, why he was doing in and out of fire workout, and he said he'd actually spoken to a judge after his last competition, and they said that was a gap in his physique that they'd noticed, and if he did his inner fire specifically workout, but the outer fire to accommodate that as well, that thickness from left to right, looking at him from the front, and specifically where the fires are touching, but further down, not just up near the groin, at the top where the glutes are, would have made for a more fuller, well-rounded, better shaped physique. So what you're looking at here, Steve, is that you should have two workouts in that example. So the first example would be the meat and potato workout, the compounds, the big fucking squats, the leg press, etc. The B workout would be filling in gaps. It might mean, for example, doing toes out instead of toes forward type leg extensions to work on a different quad position. It might mean doing adductor and abductor work on your inner and outer thighs. It might be doing more seated calf raises to get the soleus looking from left to right on the calf, looking broader, but looking on the front rather than thick from the side, and so on and so forth. It might be, as I say, where the second workout is where you work on your weaknesses, where you work on filling the gaps. It might be, for example, what do we see now? And I've seen this in a lot of youngsters recently. They do exercises to quote unquote activate a muscle. And the most recent one I saw was someone doing one arm cable pull downs on a multi-angle cable machine. It's actually kind of light, but really concentrating on trying to fire up the lat where it tied into the armpit. Unfortunately, I didn't see them doing any other heavy lat work. No chins, no heavy pull downs, no heavy rows. Everything seemed to be lat activation. And I'd actually argue in their case that perhaps they'd gone too far in the other direction. So the A workout would be rows, cleans, one of Steve's favorites, pull-ups, and so on and so forth. Whether it's barbell, dumbbell, or cable rows, whether it's pull-ups with or without resistance, whether it's on an assisted chin-up machine, and so on and so forth. And then the B workout would be the lat activation type movements, the straight arm pull downs, the specific position on certain rowing machines, the focusing on one arm type rows and one arm pull downs and one arm whatever, and trying to really fire up the muscle in that particular movement and maybe contracting the muscle as best as possible. For example, on certain rowing movements, Steve, pulling your elbow back as far as possible and holding it for a second and really trying to feel the muscle fibers where they attach to ribs, to bring that detail out so that when you are ripped and on stage, that stuff shows. And again, really in your mind, and there are certain things you can do, certain nuances, which are very, very difficult to put across on a podcast, where someone will deliberately position himself in such a way as to isolate the muscle in a particular position to bring that out. And it might be, for example, and I'll use back again as an example, certain bodybuilders have very good broad backs, but they don't have that back wing opening up, swelling almost out from the armpit into the rib cage. So, for example, certain bodybuilders have had in the past, versus, for example, literally just having a great V taper, but they don't have the swell. Is there a way of stretching the lat? Yes. Is there a way that perhaps if they work hard enough and they've got the genetic predisposition and they work on that curve, that they will bring more of that out? Yes. Is there a way, for example, of bringing the waist down that's emphasizing the lat muscle? So they need to focus on that. Yes. And this is where competing, you have to be aware. You can't just train as you did at the beginner and expect to win a top bodybuilding competition. It's almost never going to happen. Very, very few people have made it to the podium in that way. You start with the big, heavy stuff. You start with those singular A-type only workouts. And at some point, you realize, oh, my triceps weak, my back needs a better sweep, my waist is a bit too thick. And you start to have these workouts which start to focus on those particular things, bringing out nuances in your physique, emphasizing the best parts, bringing down or bringing up a weak body part, and so on and so forth. So let me give you an example again. In strongman, I've described on previous shows where the way 4 days a week training, which typically Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And the reason for Saturday was because that's when most of the events were, most of the competitions took place. Monday's workout was nearly always 2 or 3 big compound movements: a squat, bench, deadlift, press, whatever. 2 or 3 of those movements. Tuesday's workout was another couple. So, for example, let's say that Mondays was squats and deadlift, then there would be some sort of pressing, rowing type exercise on day number 2. And those are just about staying as big and as strong as possible. Workout number 3, which was Thursday, was nearly always an event or a lift that needed to be better. Meaning they'd done the last competition, they'd done incredibly well out of 6 events, but 2 events were weak for them. So Thursday's workout was bringing up your weak lifts, working, if you're a bodybuilder, on those lifts, those body parts that need to be improved. And the Saturday workout was nearly always events only, meaning they literally would do what amounted to a mini competition at about 80% of intensity, about 3 or 4 movements over the Saturday morning/afternoon. And this was just a way of getting them ready for when the competition came round, practicing some of the movements specific to that particular competition, because there could be variations there, and so on and so forth. So again, Monday, Tuesday, all about being strong. Thursday, about bringing up the weaknesses. And essentially Saturday, practicing what it feels like to train in a competition or compete in a competition. And the same thing applies to bodybuilding. You should always be able to see gaps in your physique. Sometimes it's very, very difficult for us to do that as in and of ourselves, because we see what we see every single day. So sometimes it's where a coach, a guru, a PT, or just a great, good, forward, honest buddy who says, right, amazing chest, Steve, great arms. Let's bring bits and pieces in and get those details going. So that'll be your A and your B workouts. Let's talk about steroids now. And as I said earlier, and I'll bring Steve in for this, do steroids let you do more work? Yes. Will they let you get away with doing more frequent workouts? Absolutely. So you talk about the effect that steroids can have, the difference between non-natty and the ability to do these things with steroids that weren't there before. And I think we need to get into specific, the ones that can help the most and the ones that will fuck us up. Again, train as usual, Steve.
Look, if you want to train hardcore, then at some point anabolic steroids, they're going to be a necessity. So they help bring down barriers so that you can get the most out of your training. They're also going to help you recover faster so you can hit your muscles faster. And look, we're going to go over some of our favorite Para Pharma cycles that we're going to talk about. So I'll start with one that's great if it's your first or second cycle. It's a very simple cycle. You could do just testosterone with an oral. And Para Pharma, they have excellent testosterone. You could do testosterone anywhere from 200 to 500 milligrams a week. Para Pharma also has an AI. I recommend an AI if you're going to run testosterone at a moderate dose. And then also you can stack in an oral, something like Dianabol, something like Anavar. Just depends on what your goals are. But that's a very simple stack. You can run the Dianabol 20 to 30 milligrams a day. You can run the Anavar anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams a day. And that would be a good 10 or 12-week cycle to kind of dip your feet. And you'll notice some nice effects when it comes to this. And Para Pharma, they have excellent testosterone, as I said, but they also have excellent orals. Mobster, what's the cycle that you like?
Yeah, I'm just looking at one here. And actually, when I talk about these A and B workouts and increasing workload, a good example, and again, I agree with Steve, and a great Para Pharma testosterone, for example, testo in amphate, 250 milligrams CST, and Turinabol. Turinabol will absolutely allow you to do more work. It is an athletic focused steroid, meaning your cardiovascular ability is supported, even though you might be dieting down for competition, etc. And the idea, for example, of running 500 milligrams, that would be 2 injections per week of the Testo E250, and then Turinabol at 20, 25, 30 milligrams a day, maybe as high as 40 milligrams a day, to enable you to do more work, and especially as you approach competition with that sort of higher intensity, etc., and maintaining some of your cardiovascular ability. That appeals to me enormously, Steve. Talk about, for example, Winstrol or EQ as a way of accommodating some of the increased workload, and what you would run with either one of those.
So with Winstrol, I would treat Winstrol as a good finisher to a cycle. It's going to give you some incredible pumps, especially if you like to, do a lot of these isolation lifts that we talked about earlier with your training, or finish out your workout with isolation, get a nice pump. So Winstrol, anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams a day would be really good. Equipoise is a good option. And Para Pharma, they have some excellent equipoise. And I like that they have high volume, so you don't have to inject very much when it comes to using equipoise. So with equipoise, you can run anywhere from 300 to 500 milligrams a week, and it stacks well with any of these orals that we're talking about. Or if you just want to stack it with testosterone, make things simple, you could do it that way. And I would keep the testosterone low so you don't have a lot of estrogen problems. But if you do like to run your testosterone more moderate, make sure, again, you use an AI. And Para Pharma, as I said, they have excellent aromasin, they have excellent arimidex. Mobster?
Yeah, I'm looking at another one, Steve, and I think again this specifically applies more to the bodybuilder than the strength athletes. And we've actually seen it discussed multiple times this week, ironically. And Para Pharma does a Primo 100 and a Primo 200. And Steve and I did a recent show when we talked about Primo, when I said that when you are dieting down, you're getting in shape for a holiday, for a competition, etc., as a bodybuilder. Primo, in my mind, people say, oh, it's not that anabolic or not gaining much on it. No, if you're stripping away the body fat, if you're trying to get into shape, and that will apply to the majority of our recreational listeners, not the competitive types, and even then, back in the day, the competitive types, I've always said recently, especially Steve, that Primo is a keep up, meaning you are losing fat, you're training harder, you're working those weaknesses. And in something like, for example, Primo 200, run at 400 milligrams a week, along with something like Steve says, Anavar for strength or another form of testosterone for building muscle, specifically lean muscle, maybe an enanthate or a cypionate, Steve, 300, 400 milligrams a week, as well as the Primo. You are maintaining that muscle while stripping away and trying to get down into shape. And at the same time, you are hopefully adding 1 or 2 pounds of lean muscle tissue on that particular cycle, whether, as I say, it's for a holiday, Steve, or for a competition. Now, competition cycles tend to be a bit all over the place. So, for example, we might see more training there. But the problem with trend, as I'll get to bring Steve into this, is the inflammatory issue. And again, you are deliberately, arguably, Steve, when it comes to training, you're almost trying to cause inflammation. That's part of what builds muscle, your body's response to the training. But talk about the inflammatory issues with training and perhaps the argument, Steve, here with training something more frequently.
Yeah, and I talked about, as a newbie, what to run. Well, Tren is the one you want to use if you have experience. And if you're on your fifth, sixth, seventh cycle, then this is when Tren can pay off for you. So with Tren, you can go ahead and use anywhere from 200 to 300 milligrams a week. Some people like to go higher, but the Tren is going to allow you to push beyond your wildest dreams when it comes to strength and also with volume. It's going to really be an incredible cycle. So with Tren, look, a lot of people like to run Tren very different. I like to run Tren with another mild compound. So I like to run it with the T-Bull, as Monster talked about earlier, or some Anavar. And that gives it, some balance. And you can run Tren by itself as well. Some of the best cycles, and they've kept their side effects minimum, have been running Tren by itself. And I have to laugh at some people out there who think that you shouldn't run Tren by itself. I mean, where do they get that from? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Tren, absolutely can be ran solo. It's both androgenic and anabolic. So it basically can do it all. So you can absolutely run it by itself, and you can actually, in the process, keep the side effects minimal by running it by itself. So that's an option. And Para Pharma has many different Tren options that you guys can definitely take a look at.
And one more, Steve, before I talk about Para Pharma specifically. I'm thinking here, I'm not a huge fan per se because of the way that I train and my current targets and aspirations of using shorter acting, shorter esters. So, for example, I'm looking at Suspension 100 by Para Pharma. I'm looking at Testo P100 by Para Pharma, and so on and so forth, right? So normally, for me, these wouldn't be appropriate. However, and again, I'll touch upon the bodybuilder either competing or is looking to get into shape for a holiday, where it might make more sense to use a shorter acting esters, the suspension is a good example, as you get closer to your peak, as you get more and more into shape. And the allowance of using an anabolic more frequently, again, suspension, pre-gym, or pre the workout that you want to work on your weaknesses on, and so on and so forth, makes more sense to me. Basically, what I've been looking for here is a sensation of how I feel when I'm on the shorter acting esters. And I think this applies to the majority of listeners and users that have done the shorter stuff. You tend to, quote unquote, feel them more. And there's a sensation, I would argue, as per the trend that Steve just discussed, where you feel more capable. So talk about using the shorter acting esters here, Steve, as a way of getting into shape while you're working on the weaknesses, and especially if you're doing 2 such workouts per week.
Yeah, they're in your system quicker and they're out of your system quicker. So that'd be the big advantage. So if you want to keep a cycle short, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, that would be a good option for you. And that would help with recovery as well. So afterwards, in terms of like recovering your testosterone levels. So I think one of the big problems too we see with people is they'll run a cycle, they'll run on a cycle that's too long and they don't realize these esters are in their system for a long time. So they stay shut down much longer than they anticipate. And then
Yeah,
when they come off, they crash a lot harder because their body has a hard time recovering its natural testosterone after a cycle. So I think in a lot of cases, that's what happens. A lot of people, they take 3 steps forward and they take 2 steps back or 3 steps back. They lose everything because they don't anticipate that crash. So running a shorter cycle with these shorter esters that Para Pharma has available can be a good option in that situation. So, Monster, I'm finish up with final thoughts and then talk about Para Pharma quality. And I'll start actually.
listen, you and I,
Yeah.
you and I both use Para Pharma, Steve. I've talked on a previous show, or more than one show, in fact, about using Para Pharma products. I was fortunate enough to be in a position to do a very short 4 week cut on Para Pharma products, and I had to quote a certain comedy character, great success. I was able to bring my belt size down 2 notches. I was able to actually recomposition because my body weight started at 327, went down to 320, and went back up at the end of the cycle with a smaller waist at 300, so back to 327 pounds. So I'd actually added muscle, dropped a belt size, got into better shape. And this was in a minimum of 4 weeks. I went straight from there into a bulk and went up to 336 pounds, which was the all-time high. So in fact, doing the cut meant I was actually probably giving myself room to grow, room to blow up. So that was absolutely fantastic. For me, the quality of the product is important. You want to make sure that it's dosed exactly like it says and does exactly what it's supposed to. We don't want to get in an anthlate and find it's a cypionate. We don't want to be doing something that we think is a short ester and find it's actually been swapped for a cheaper, longer ester. We don't want products that are underdosed. We want products that we dose exactly as they're supposed to so that we know exactly what's in our system and we can manipulate the variables. We want a product that's, for example, Steve, I said they're one of the few companies that uses black sachets. And I like the fact that they've literally gone out when every other company is running whites, sachets and putting printed labels on. This company went out and invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to completely redesign just the look of the oral sachets that they're using. When every other company, as I said, is using a white sachet or a metallic foil type sachet to put the pills in, to put the orals in, they went out and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to stand out in the market. We talk about stuff like, for example, this all the time, Steve. How long has a company like Para Pharma been around? I think we're talking in excess of 10 years. I think 13, 14 years. You do not get to last long in the marketplace if your products are poor. If you get for a couple of years, you're doing well. If you're 5 years in, you're doing well. If you're a decade plus and looking to get towards your second decade, it's because you have a quality product that's appreciated by users from all over the world. Resellers that sell Para Pharma product, it's the same approach, Steve. You said if you are a company, whether you're a big supermarket in the high street, and all you sell is baked beans, you want the supplier of those baked beans to be able to take the damaged tins away, to give you refunds quickly, to supply product as and when there are peaks and troughs in the sales. You want all of these kind of things. And this is exactly the same for a reseller when it comes to PEDs. You want products that don't have to be turned back because they weren't performing, don't have any particular problems, that the company you're dealing with is professional, is a proper business and takes a business-like attitude. How many labs have you and I seen that have come and gone with poor products, products that are completely faked, products with no growth hormone in the growth hormone, no, some of them where we thought we had Anabol and it was Dynabol. I've had Dynabol, Steve, that had no active ingredient in whatsoever. Given to me for free, thank fuck, but I was still a week behind prepping for a competition because the product they'd been given to me free had no active ingredient whatsoever. I don't want pills that crumble. I don't want to see floaters in my oils. I don't want oils that sting. If I use a high volume per milligram, per milliliter type product, I don't want post-injection pain. And if you start, not just with Steve and I, but if you go online and you look at reviews for Para Pharma products, you're seeing great results. You're seeing that if they train their asses off and eat properly, they're getting great results. If their PCT is on point and they follow some of the training tips and advice we give them, they keep the majority of their gains. You're not seeing complaints about post-injection pain. You're not seeing complaints about underdose products. You are seeing literally where products have been sent away and tested. Talk briefly about Para Pharma before we go into the disclaimer, Steve.
Yeah, one of the things great about Para Pharma too, they have excellent reps on the forums that are always there to guide you and help you. Excellent shipping, excellent products, as you talked about. And it's very important to trust your source. And Para Pharma, as you said, Mobster, they've been around a long time.
Yep.
They've been around, what, 13, 14 years
13,
now?
14 years now, I think. Yep.
And they have a lot of great reviews out there from people. And one of the ways you can tell a source is a good source is you have repeat buyers. And it's the same thing with the
Yes.
companies. We trust, we buy things as consumers from places that we are happy with. We don't go back to a place that screwed us over. Like if you go to an auto mechanic and he fucks your car up, are you going to go back to the same auto mechanic? I don't think so. So it's the same thing when it comes to steroids. You want to stick with sources that treat you good. You don't want to go
Yeah.
and trust the source with bad reviews or a source that treats you like shit, and rips you off. So obviously Para Pharma is an A+ source, A+ brand, excuse me. And Para Pharma is a great option for you for any of these steroids that we talked about here. So Mobster, finish up with a disclaimer. Great show.
Thank you very much for listening, guys. Let us know your comments, all your thoughts on training twice a week. Come onto the forums, post in the comments below how you've been able to do it, what products from Para Pharma you use that enabled you to get this more volume, this more frequency of workout. We want to know what your thoughts are. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.